You are tuned in to a Fireside Chat with Zany Mystic. Join us now on another exciting metaphysical journey. Relax, tune in, drop out, and take a seat by the fire as we explore new realms and possibilities. This is Magenta Pixie. You can find me at magentapixie.weebly.com. But now, here is Zany Mystic and guest. Enjoy the show.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to a Fireside Chat with Zany Mystic. I am your host, Lance White. Tonight, my guest is John Hogue. John returns to share his wisdom and insight, and he will be sharing his latest prophecies and predictions for 2011. John has received international recognition, appearing on over 100 television and 700 radio shows, no doubt more than that by now, on 3 continents. Describing himself as a rogue scholar, his pursuit of inner wisdom, combined with intense research on Nostradamus' quatrains, coupled with deep spiritual digging, has given him unique insight into the human being and our near future. His website is www.hogueprophecy.com, and it empowers us to awaken to our inner selves, fully present, while observing the play of life. Tonight, we'll be talking about his latest ebook, Predictions for 2011. So, without further ado, let's welcome John back to the show now. Hi, John. How are you?
I'm doing fine, Lance. I just came up from my little village here in just 40 minutes north of Seattle, where there was a gallery crawl going on, and I got to watch a couple of belly dancers be posing as a bunch of people sketched them and did oils and watercolors. And my crazy little town is exactly the place for me. I fit right in.
Wow. Kind of quirky and interesting.
Well, I kind of call it, it's the only town I've been in where the sense of community reminds me somewhat like a shadow of what I used to experience when I lived in Rajneesh, when I lived in a commune of 20,000 people in the eastern Oregon desert. Wow. It has that kind of sense of community. There's 3 theaters here, thespian theaters, a children's theater. We have an orchestra. A lot of Hollywood expatriates, including one of my friends who was the little girl who was the autograph hound, hounding Jack Benny on the Jack Benny show, and then playing violin.
Oh, my God. Wow.
Yeah, she's up here.
Jeez.
We have a few Academy Award winners up here.
Oh, which one?
I think it was somebody for sound. About 3 years ago, somebody got a best sound. I don't know him that well. I've seen him pass through town, but we have that. We had one of the French hornsmen of the LA Philharmonic, and a lot of retired LA Philharmonic orchestral people, and it's interesting. And I also was born in Hollywood, California, so although I always felt like a changeling living in LA, I always felt like I belonged up here, and I eventually got up here after a few detours to India and around the world, Australia and Bangkok and a few other places.
Wow. Well, we both had experiences with groups where you get to live on the site, with a spiritual teacher. And Rajneesh is one of my all-time favorites. It seems as if these groups are really seeds of the future, that they really are ways of being and ways of living that we can take back into the world and help to create. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, because one of the things that I've been doing since I started writing books about 17 books ago, the last 7 being ebooks, and the others since then, before then, were all made of dead trees. And I'm trying to lower my carbon footprint, and hopefully my readers will lower theirs too by reading books on photons and electrons.
Right. I agree.
But anyway, I have, in the study of prophecy, realized that there's two definitions of prophecy. Prophecy is the more kind of mundane interpretation of the word is making predictions, forecasting the future. But the deeper, more significant, esoteric meaning of prophecy is divine inspiration. It's enlightenment. It's awakening to the truth, a revelation. And so in that, if one goes deep enough into the study of prophecy like I have, one has to plumb the deeper sense of that. And so I started in my early 20s after having a spiritual satori or a glimpse of something kind of amazing that totally altered my life. That's when you know you've really had a spiritual experience. If you've really had a very powerful spiritual experience and it hasn't just been another masturbation of the mind in the name of spiritualism, it will change your life. It'll physically change you. It'll change who you're around, what you're doing, and that's a good indicator that it was for real. So I went off and I started studying. Since I saw the future as being so dire, I wanted to see if there was an alternative to it, and that's where I got into the deeper understanding of prophecy, which is about bringing divine inspiration into the world. And one of the key people in my life, the key person in my life who I met in 1980 and sat before him, and he actually initiated me into neo-sannyas, was OSHO, or he was known then Bhagwan, and he, I also came to understand that something that I think the future will understand, that he was one of the significant teachers of our time, and he was also a prophet of the new humanity.
Absolutely.
And I hope to write a 3-book series, which will be part autobiographical and part what I usually do, studying the bigger picture of prophecy and collective examinations of prophecy, as a way to, because, I am not just a person on the riverbank being a scholar about water. I jump in. It's just like somebody who says that they're an expert on love and they can be objective about love because they've never loved anybody. There are certain subjective mysteries that you have to be a part of to really understand. Anybody who's really loved would laugh at anybody who had that kind of stance. Well, anyone who's really jumped into the mystery of being with a real master, a spiritual teacher, a person like a Gurdjieff or an OSHO, it is you have to take the risk, and it is a real, this kind of supermarket spiritualism, which is more kind of distraction, entertainment in the name of therapy groups, The Secret, the Power of Now,
creating your reality.
These things are, if they don't really upset your apple cart of ego, then they're BS.
Yep.
And in the name of something very spiritual. But when you're with real teachers, it takes guts because, it's 2 things. It takes guts for 2 reasons. You become exposed to yourself. If you're in a spiritual community of a master, everybody that's there is kind of bouncing off each other's ego trips, so they get exposed in the climate of the Buddha field of the master. The other thing is that you get is a subtler fear, the fear of joy, the fear of bliss and ecstasy. When you go through the stuff where you peel off the sloughed dead skin of your ego and then you discover what is underneath, there's a whole universe that's an eternal process after that, the eternity of now, that you tap into, and it's shattering as well. It's like a spiritual orgasm. In fact, it is the higher. Osho used to talk about, and he had a very controversial book. He spoke in India about it, and it was at a time when India was very uptight about sexuality in the late 60s. And his lecture series was called From Sex to Superconsciousness. And, he's always been often called by the stupid press, who only seem to read the, if all of our history of the great masters was based on police reports and studies of angry disciples who didn't get their projections fulfilled, like Judas, or, I bet you if you only had Judas as your source of Jesus Christ, it wouldn't be a very good story. He would be a cult guru and against the traditions and a threat. Well, Osho was called the sex guru by a lot of people because but if you actually knew him, if you actually sat before him, if you lived in his communities, you discovered that in a subtle way he was sex's greatest enemy. He understood that the best way to get beyond one's biological issues is to go through them with awareness. And so he said, sex is a good beginning, but don't stop there. Mm-hmm. You have to keep going. Mm-hmm. You have to, because the whole point is superconsciousness. Mm-hmm. And sex is the very lowest beginning part. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of people who do these tantric groups that are really just another name for a swing party. You know, which is okay. I'm not for or against that. But when they call it tantric spiritual, no, it's a swing party with a spiritual gleam. But you know, what I learned from Osho's path, which for me it was very tantric, although Osho was many multi-dimensions. He was it depended if you came in, he spoke on all the traditions, the Jewish, the Arab, the Sufi, the Buddhist, the Hindu. And it all was in morning talk sessions lasting about 2.5 hours, sometimes morning and evening, that ended up being almost 800 books worth of information.
And I have quite a few of those in there.
Yeah, do you have Yoga Alpha Omega Volume 1?
Yes, I do.
You are lucky, because Volume 1 and Volume 3 are almost impossible to get. I must have gotten the last 2 copies on the planet.
Well, there was an old bookstore in the Haight, Ashbury in San Francisco, and they had gotten a huge load of Osho books from the ashram, and a lot of them were first editions and you know, the rare ones. And I bought as many as I could that were interesting to me, but you know, I didn't know shit from Shinola. So, but you know, what impressed me was that he could just turn on a dime and talk about any tradition. And to me, that's a indication of a master.
Well, he was also unique in that he was before his enlightenment, he basically came from being a teacher. You know, he was a professor of philosophy in Jabalpur University, and then he claims to have gotten enlightened at a very young age of 21, and said that was also kind of difficult, because if you get enlightened before the age of 35, when you're still kind of in the upward climb of your biology, it's really hard on the vehicle.
Oh, yeah.
And so, you know, he died at 59. Of course, he was poisoned by thallium heavy poisoning when he was arrested without a warrant in Charlotte. You know what? This is another thing to get into. You know, you've got somebody who may be a real master when they upset a lot of people.
Oh, yes.
you know, everybody that Oprah Winfrey embraces is not a master. If they're cuddly and I love you, you love me, and, you know, if they're Barney the purple dinosaur nice to you, you're not dealing with a real master, because if you study the history of masters, they are always called cult gurus. Yeah. Threatening the youth. Why did they poison Socrates? For the same things they were hurling at Osho, they were hurling at Socrates 2,500 years before. Yeah. Buddha was poisoned.
I did not know.
In the West, it's not that well known. There's a lot of information about Buddha that is not carried over because of Western bias, but he was actually poisoned by Devadatta, his half-brother, who was very much jealous of what he was doing and tried 8 times to kill him, and finally killed him by dropping probably some doo-doo in his bowl of rice, and then he died at 84 of extreme dysentery from being poisoned by bad food.
Well, of course, then you have the paradox that the master knows his moment of death.
Yes. That's true. I saw that with Osho. It's quite remarkable. There are stories about it. He started getting very transparent. About 6 months before a real master dies, he knows. And one of the interesting things, Osho is very subtle about that. I know his dentist, David Geet, who's hopefully someday going to publish his amazing book on his life with Osho. Osho was always teaching